Hello everyone, happy Friday. Thank you for joining us on The Headline. I'm Brandon Waltens, managing editor of Texas Scorecard. Look, the Texas House of Representatives may be taking an early weekend, but here at Texas Scorecard, we're working through. We're actually here, we're doing stuff. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look, we've got just 10 some odd days left here in the legislative session in Austin. And a big deadline coming up on Tuesday for the House to pass Senate bills. Well, they had calendars scheduled throughout the weekend, and then this happened yesterday. Check this out.
Members, you may want to pay attention to this. Mr. Leach and Mr. Moody moved the House recess until 1 p.m. Sunday. Is there objection? Chair hears none. The House stands at recess.
Right. They took a recess. They recessed actually from Thursday afternoon all the way to Sunday afternoon. Here to talk about what that means and kind of break down what happened, I've got Jeramy Kitchen, our Capitol correspondent. Jeremy has also got a very, very spicy special Friday episode of This Week in Texas talking about exactly this. So don't listen to it right now. Listen to it after the show, right? But you're going to not want to miss that one. Jeremy, what happened? I mean, we had calendars scheduled. Everybody that I had talked to who works in the Capitol had said that they had been told that they were planning to work throughout the weekend, and then this.
Sure. So generally right after the House had convened yesterday, you had State Representative Jeff Leach, right, a Republican from Allen, get up at the back mic and ask kind of a series of parliamentary inquiries. It seemed like somewhat orchestrated theater. He had some posed questions that he would phrase in the form of a question to Speaker Phelan. Phelan a few times answered directly, a few times said, right, he didn't recognize him for that, but the point stood, right? And he was trying to make the point that he alleged that the Senate was not moving quick enough on bills that were criminal justice reform priorities of Speaker Dade Phelan's, right? Which, of course, Jeff Leach was the author of some. And so trying to make the point that the Senate wasn't moving quick enough, and it was kind of this, we see this generally work out in different forms every session, but kind of this flex, if you will, by the House to say, can we stop working on Senate bills if they're going to stop working on House bills?
Yeah, this isn't exactly unheard of. You do kind of see this every couple years to some extent, right? Where you have the House or the Senate sort of butting heads over some level of perceived inactivity on one chamber's end. It is important to note, I think, that at this time that Jeff Leach and these Democrats were making these statements, that the Senate had actually passed more House bills than the House had passed Senate bills.
Correct.
But you know, regardless, he goes to the back mic. He says enough is enough, and ultimately joins Democrat Joe Moody in motioning to adjourn.
That's right. After they had gone through the day's calendar,
rather, I should say. Yeah.
That's right. They'd gone through the day's calendar, and the Speaker announced that on the motion of Representative Jeff Leach and Speaker Pro Tem Joe Moody, Democrat, that the House was going to adjourn until Sunday. And notably, not a single House representative objected to that motion.
Well, and instead, you watch that clip, there was actually cheering and applause as they were showing it to the Senate. Well, in this process, there's actually some pretty big effects of that. In effect, as the Speaker swung down that gavel, you had hundreds of bills killed right then.
That's right. There was, there's the deadline that's kind of nerfed or, doesn't really matter now for Saturday. Right? Yeah. Where there was the impending deadline to preventing House committees from voting out any additional Senate bills or Senate joint resolutions. That was Saturday. Right? And obviously, now that the House recessed, that deadline kind of doesn't matter. There weren't any additional committees meeting, right? And then, of course, there were some casualties to that. Not just, legislative parties of, let's say, the Republican Party of Texas, but just in general. There were hundreds of bills that were kind of stuck in limbo, right? Waiting to either get voted out of committee or not, and they now can't.
Yeah, one of those big bills, Republican Party of Texas priority legislation, was Senate Bill 1311, which was another piece of legislation designed to prevent child gender modification. Once again, killed in the House. Actually, going to be talking about that with Jacob Assmusen in just a few minutes. But even bills that weren't killed, right, now they're sort of pushed back further in the process, right, because they were supposed to come in today. They're not obviously in today. So they're going to be working on Friday and Saturday's calendar on Sunday, and that process sort of dominoes down.
Sure. I think the takeaway there, right, is that, like, yes, to your point, they had a calendar posted for today, a calendar posted for Saturday already, right? But this was before they decided to recess. They also had a local and consent calendar posted for Friday. So what that means is all three of those things are going to be put on Sunday. And by the way, they added a Sunday calendar, right?
Yeah.
And they're also going to have to hear the bills that they voted out yesterday on third and final reading on Sunday. So you can see the number of bills on that calendar starts to stack up.
If this sounds familiar, this is what we saw last week as the House had its own deadline to pass House bills, where there were pages and pages of the calendar that lawmakers ultimately ran out of time to get to. But looking at some of the calendars for the week ahead, there is some bills placed on major state, which essentially means that they are all but guaranteed to at least arrive to them.
Right.
One of those bills has received a little bit of criticism. It's actually a priority of Governor Greg Abbott, this Pandemic Liability Protection Act.
Right. This is the bill that, is specific for, it's basically to protect businesses from lawsuits related to COVID, right? As far as liability. And to your point, there's a lot of concern about some of the things that are still included in the bill, even though we were kind of told they'd be taken out or changed or altered in a way to make it to where, everyone benefits.
Yeah, you've got an article on this, and excuse me, former state representative Matt Rinaldi, who's a constitutional law expert himself and has been looking through this legislation for quite some time and has been sounding the alarm on it, says that rather than just protect businesses from COVID lawsuits, it could actually in some ways codify the directives of, the CDC.
Right, that's right. I mean, mask mandates, right?
Yeah.
Social distancing, making businesses liable for these things while also, individuals themselves going into a business. I mean, there's a lot of concerning things here. In the wake of what we seem like we're kind of moving away from some of that, here we are codifying it. And by the way, it's an emergency priority of Governor Abbott's, right?
Right. The sponsor on that bill is, mentioned him twice now, but it is State Representative Jeff Leach,
right.
Who had some discussion with Matt Rinaldi about this. They were going at it on Twitter. You wrote about that, where essentially Representative Leach told Rinaldi that he would make some changes, and ultimately those changes weren't, I guess, actually made in this version of the bill. So we'll see if lawmakers actually move to make it a good bill, a better bill, when it hits the floor next week. Another piece of legislation that is slated to have some discussion in the Texas House is Senate Bill 10. Now, this is a taxpayer-funded lobbying ban. I kind of put ban in quotes. Sure. When this legislation passed out of the Senate, it was a prohibition on taxpayer-funded lobbying on cities and counties.
Right.
And now, not so much.
That's right. So it sat, this passed out of the Senate a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
It sat in the House State Affairs Committee for a while. They decided to hear it suddenly late last week. They voted it out, but what became apparent was what they voted out was a committee substitute or a revision. And that revision now, it's kind of this weird shell game, right? It expands the jurisdictions that are affected. It's still local entities, but it's not just cities and counties, right? There's universities, college districts, special purpose districts, all of those things. But it also adds in language that essentially creates loopholes for lawyers, right? Like if I'm an attorney, I can go in, not have to register as a lobbyist, which is how they get around the taxpayer-funded lobbying ban, right, or the supposed ban, not have to register as a lobbyist and represent a municipality, right, that. And that's on the House floor coming up this week. It's certainly a far cry away from what Republican primary voters indicated they wanted last year, right? Where and the thing that should be noted, right, is that out of all the taxpayer-funded lobbying ban bills that were filed this session, this is the only one that got past the chamber. It passed the Senate as a local city and county ban only, and it's kind of been mutated into this thing, and you kind of have to ask yourself whether it's a ban at all.
Well, and that's what's interesting, because you look at 2 years ago, the Senate did pass a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. That bill was ultimately voted down in the House.
Right.
Interesting to see that the Senate this time started out stripping sort of its own bill, narrowing it just to cities and counties, leaving out school districts, leaving out other tax entities. And now we have, these even more changes being made in the House to where essentially it basically gives the green light for this to continue.
The statewide ban, right? It should be noted, the statewide ban bills, there were two of them, one in the House and Senate. The one in the House got heard in the House State Affairs Committee, but never voted out. The one in the Senate, never even got a hearing.
Right. So we'll see. Again, lawmakers, they might have the chance to amend that bill, make that bill better, make it a stronger sweeping ban. But right now, certainly looks like in its current form, it's not exactly what Republican voters were looking for. Other bills on the calendar looking ahead. Oh, we've got Senate Bill 4, the Star-Spangled Banner Act. What is that one again? People have maybe forgotten.
Sure. So this was a priority of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's. I believe it was back in February when he announced these things. This came in kind of the wake of, at the time, or that day, when the Dallas Mavericks owner, right, Mark Cuban, had announced that they weren't going to play the Star-Spangled Banner ahead of any of the Dallas Mavericks games. That same day, I believe, right, the NBA kind of came out and made it known, like, our policy is that it will be played. And that issue kind of, I'm not going to say it went away, but Dan Patrick, right, filed this bill. The author of the bill, who I believe is State Senator Don Buckingham, when it was being laid out in the Senate before it was passed, she had indicated that it was kind of this all-encompassing thing that basically means that any of these entities that contract with government, right? Facilities, get tax breaks, like that sort of stuff. It's now a requirement via the bill that they have to ensure that they do play the Star-Spangled Banner. Otherwise, the contract, if you will, becomes null and void. And they don't get some of those benefits. And so that bill's up in the House. And the House sponsor for that is State Representative Dustin Burrows.
Another Senate bill, or rather a resolution, is this SJR 19, which deals with visitation for nursing homes in pandemic. Again, another measure that had already passed the Senate. Now we're finally seeing it on a House calendar.
That's right. This is the kind of the enabling, the constitutional amendment provision being authored that it codifies, if you will. It ensures that you have a right, should you be, let's say, in a nursing home during a declared disaster, right, to have someone that can come visit you, right, so you're not alone. This was a huge issue we saw over the last year.
Sure.
The testimony on this bill and then the actual Senate bill on this alone was very difficult to kind of get through. You had a lot of families that were affected by this.
Absolutely. We got some deadlines coming up in both chambers, right? So what are we looking at deadline-wise?
Sure. So House side, the House right now has posted calendars, like we talked about earlier, for Friday and Saturday. They're going to get moved to Sunday. Sunday's calendar's already posted. They've posted a calendar for Monday. They have not posted a calendar for Tuesday. What's important about that is that Tuesday is the last day that the House can consider any new Senate bills or Senate joint resolutions, right? To kind of step back from that, on Sunday at 10 p.m. is the last time/day in which the House can post a calendar for Tuesday, right? Maybe they don't take that long. Maybe they post it between now and then. But the Tuesday marks the deadline for the House to consider any new bills at all. The Senate, their deadline is Wednesday at midnight to consider any new bills at all. And really anything past that point is going to be kind of reconciling conference committee reports, accepting amendments from one chamber to the other.
Those are the last few days until the end of the month when they adjourn. Well, Terry Watching asks, says, what about critical race theory in schools?
Sure. So the only bill that moved from that, House Bill 3979 by State Representative Steve Toth, Republican from the Woodlands, that passed out of the House, I guess, last week or early last week. And then it is on the Senate intent calendar, moved through the Senate State Affairs Committee this week. It is on the Senate intent calendar, but to my knowledge, unless they get to it today, they have not gotten to it yet. Again, talking about the deadlines, they technically have until Wednesday to vote that bill out. And so if there's any amendments, right, it'd have to go back to the House and have to be reconciled and all that stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We're going to be watching those deadlines all throughout the next week, and encourage everybody to be, especially in these last few days here, this legislative session, tuning into This Week in Texas as Jeremy marks down the ever-changing landscape of what's happening day to day. Well, I mentioned it before, with the House having adjourned, having recessed earlier this weekend, one casualty of that maneuver was legislation to protect minors from being subjected to mutilation surgeries, this child gender modification, which is a priority of the Republican Party of Texas. A lot of this was spurred on by the story of a Texas man named Jeff Younger, who is dealing with his son being subjected to a lot of these practices by his ex-wife right now. We've got a featured story about that. Take a look at just a clip from that right now.
This is James Younger. James lives in the Dallas, Texas area. He loves boxing, hanging out with his dad, enjoys building things and playing with his brother. James is a boy. When James was 2 years old, his mother began to tell him that he was a girl.
Who told you you're a girl?
Mommy.
Coercing him to present himself as a female in public. James's father disagreed, wanting James to be his true biological self. His parents have gotten divorced, and in those legal proceedings, his mother has attempted to seize sole authority over medical decisions for James, which include the power to give him permanently sterilizing drugs. These are puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are highly controversial drugs used by groups like the Genesis Clinic to stop healthy children from entering the natural process of puberty.
This is an off-label, untested, experimental use. It hasn't been through any FDA approval process. It's what I would call a chemical conversion therapy.
These drugs are promoted by practitioners across the country, such as Dr. Johanna Olson Kennedy.
A 15-year-old would want a vagina if they identified as a girl is really not that out there. It's actually pretty understandable. Surgery, chest surgery for trans guys as minors is critical, and it's available. It's not nearly as difficult as genital reconstruction because it doesn't have anything to do with sterilization. The difficulty of genital surgery is that it is surgical sterilization, and people get super worked up about that.
According to Jeff Younger, his ex-wife plans to keep taking him to court until James is 24. And as that is happening, the Dallas Genesis Clinic is already administering puberty blocker drugs to children, and James is at risk of becoming another victim.
It's just absolutely a heartbreaking story to watch. Jacob Assmusen here worked on that along with a couple other of our folks here at Texas Scorecard. The full feature is up on TexasScorecard.com. It's on our YouTube or Facebook, etc. Really encourage people to watch the whole video. What was that like working through that?
You know, researching the whole James Younger story, it's heartbreaking and also infuriating to see how these kids are vulnerable to these permanently scarring procedures. So it's so critical that we protect these kids.
Yes, and so that's going to be a story that continues, it looks like, unfortunately, frankly, to be relevant for at least the time being. The Texas House has had now, I think, 3 opportunities to ban this practice, or 3 major opportunities to ban this practice, and yet they have killed it 3 times.
Yeah. The first one, House Bill 1399, would have prohibited insurance providers from providing for these type of mutilating procedures. The second one would have classified them as child abuse. And then the third one was similar to the first, and it would also revoke medical licenses from people who perform these type of surgeries on kids. And all 3 of them have been done. Nothing's been done. The House did nothing on them.
Yeah, you had House Bill 1399, which was sent to a calendar that they never got to last week. You had the other Senate bill by Charles Perry that would have classified it as child abuse. Literally, Stephanie Click, the chair of the Public Health Committee, not voting it out of her committee. And then the most recent action we have here is Senate Bill 1311, which, as you mentioned, right? This was a last-ditch sort of opportunity. The Senate sent this bill to the House earlier this week, right? The beginning of this week, and Speaker Dade Phelan never even referred it to committee before they adjourned, and now they're not going to have time to do it, right? They've passed that deadline. So absolutely sad to see that happening in the House. Meanwhile, in the Senate, they're catching up. They're passing some of these House bills. Bills have already passed the House previously this year. One of those bills that you wrote about yesterday is the public camping ban, right? A bill dealing with that.
Yeah, so this was a contentious issue. The Texas Senate prohibiting public camping across the state. This issue started a couple years ago when the Democrat-run Austin City Council actually repealed their public camping laws. They essentially allowed unrestrained, lawless
And by the
public
way,
camping.
Democrat run is like, that might even be kind of generous. I think you literally have some like socialists on the Austin City Council. These are not your blue dog Democrats running the show.
Definitely comrades, for sure. But yeah, so they allowed unrestrained homeless camping, except at City Hall.
Of
probably,
course.
right, and the mayor's
Not
office.
in my backyard, right?
Right. And so their decision sparked a wildfire of chaos, surge in the homeless population, surge.
Literal fires too, by the way. Literal wildfires
Literal
too.
fires that destroyed or damaged historic landmarks,
Yep.
right? You have double-digit surges in violent crime,
Yeah.
all kinds of chaos, right? So Texas lawmakers, the Senate, stepped in and say, look, we have to stop this, right? Not only in Austin, but for all Texans.
And this was a bill that had already passed out of the House a few weeks ago. One thing I found interesting looking at this vote was that in the House you had large Democrat opposition. I don't remember off the top of my head the vote breakdown, but you had a lot of Democrats opposed to this in the House. In the Senate, it seemed that the Senate Democrats largely were not opposed to it. I think the ultimate vote was 27-4.
Right. In the House, you kind of had a mixed thing. Even in the House, Democrats tried to stall the bill with some parliamentary maneuvers.
Yeah.
But in the Senate, overwhelming majority supported passing these protections because they protect not only citizens, kids trying to play at parks, right? Kids going to schools, but it also protects the homeless. Because we saw that things like human trafficking, drug deals, all kinds of crime surged in the homeless community because of the Democrats' decisions. And so, in the Senate, overwhelming majority supported these protections.
Well, I mean, we have to mention that you also had earlier this month a little vote of the citizens of Austin who pretty overwhelmingly rejected, said, please put these camping bans back in place.
Right.
And so that speaks too. I mean, these were Democrats and Republicans in Austin voting, saying enough is enough with that. Another big action that happened this week is that Governor Greg Abbott issued a new executive order. They're really starting to pile up. Now we've got executive orders that are like undoing other executive orders and like a mandate to not mandate this. And the latest one is he says no masks in public schools after June 4th. That's the magic day, I guess, the end of the school year. After then, will masks no longer be mandated. In fact, he says that local governments who try to enforce it will face a $1,000 fine. You've written about some people who have been fighting their school districts on this. Up till now, it was actually up to the individual school boards.
Right. This was a big recent controversy in the state. You have back in March, I believe, Governor Greg Abbott removed the mask mandate, right? And over the next month, we saw actually the coronavirus numbers drop to record lows. And so during that, school districts across the state had the choice to also remove their mask mandates or still keep them. You had a lot of school districts, I think over 100 and counting, remove the mask mandates. But here in Central Texas, you had a big fight in the Round Rock School District, where despite the scientific evidence and despite warnings from medical experts saying hey, you need to stop forcing masks on kids, school districts still decided to force masks on kids, caused a huge community controversy. And so now you have the governor coming in with an executive order saying, hey, okay, school districts, you can't do this anymore, but starting after the school year's over.
Yeah, I want to note, because the thing I find interesting about this is that he issued this executive order, okay, no mask mandates. Well, at the same time, the legislature is in session right now. They could pass a bill to do this. In fact, House members had the opportunity to pass an amendment that would have prohibited mask mandates, and they actually voted it down with some Republicans helping tank that effort. I think as people talk about executive overreach and some of this unilateral authority we've seen during the coronavirus, specifically from Governor Greg Abbott, even as they're sort of fixing this, winding some of the stuff back, still the fact that he's using executive orders to do it, I think probably gives some people pause.
Right.
But We'll end on a positive note here. You did see one piece of legislation, Republican Party of Texas priority legislation, that did ultimately get signed into law this week, and that is the pro-life heartbeat bill.
Yep, Senate Bill 8, the Texas Heartbeat Act, was signed into law this week. Now, this law makes it illegal for an individual to kill a child in the womb once that child's heartbeat is detected.
Yes, and not only that, it also gives a cause of action, right, so that any Texan can sue.
Right, that's the unique thing about this law, is that the government is not enforcing it. It actually empowers private citizens to sue abortion providers and those who aid and abet in killing children in the womb. So that's what makes it unique among some other states' heartbeat laws, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, the thinking behind that being that, okay, where most of these abortion mills are, Harris County, the big urban counties, that their district attorneys are not going to prosecute for this.
Right.
So trying to put another avenue so that these abortion mills can be actually taken care of. Of course, you've seen some, backlash from them. They're, of course, threatening to go to court. There's going to be lawsuits. This law ultimately will not go into effect until September. And so we'll see what happens there. We'll be following it. Well, thank you so much, Jacob, for filling us in on all that. I want to say hello to everybody watching. I want to say hello. I see Tiffany watching from Deer Park, Steph as well watching from there, Joyce tuning in from Belton, Debbie from Waco. Thank you all so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to follow what's happening right at TexasScorecard.com, where we'll be updating you as the legislature in these last 10 days, right? The last 10 days here, this final countdown. We'll continue giving you the news. And as I mentioned earlier, please subscribe to This Week in Texas by Jeramy Kitchen, our Capitol correspondent, where most days that the legislature's in session, he's going to give you the scoop in the morning about what to expect and what to be looking for. Well, have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in to The Headline. If you want to stay up to date with the news you need to be an informed citizen, be sure to check out TexasScorecard.com and subscribe to our email list. You can also listen to this show and other shows on whatever podcast platform you use. Subscribe and review our show now to ensure other Texans can be informed.